At my first international show, I quoted from my own diary. Sometimes the best legacy is the life you build when no one believes you can. And I was elbow deep in cadmium red when my mother's name lit up for the second time in 10 minutes. Her ringtone slicing through the calm like a warning siren before a storm I hadn't asked for. She never called unless something was wrong, or more accurately, unless she needed something from me under the guise of a crisis. And judging by the urgency on the screen, this wasn't a social call. I wiped my hand on a rag, paint streaks bleeding into the fabric like old wounds, and answered, already bracing for whatever demand was being wrapped in emotional blackmail today. Camille. She exhaled like I was her last lifeline. We've got a situation. I didn't respond right away, letting the silence stretch just enough to make her uncomfortable, even though I knew that game never worked on her. She continued, her voice dripping with performance. Your sister, Reed left her. Just vanished. Cleaned out their joint accounts and took off in the middle of the night. No note. No warning. The boys are devastated. She's coming undone. She needs a safe place, and we thought, well, you have that big studio sitting there. It was like being punched in the ribs with a velvet glove, the kind that hides bruises just enough to be dismissed later. I steadied my breath and looked around at the only place I ever felt like myself. Sunlight filtering through the tall windows, glinting off jars of brushes, the sharp scent of turpentine lingering under the citrus of my morning tea, and canvases in various stages of completion leaning like sentinels against the walls. This was not just a room. It was my pulse, my history, my future. She didn't even ask how I was doing. She never did. Not when my hand got fractured at 17 and nearly derailed my entire scholarship application. Not when my first exhibit was canceled due to a gallery fire. And certainly not when I used every cent I had saved to put a down payment on this house 5 years ago, which they still believed I rented. I was 36 now, old enough that they should have started treating me like an adult long ago. But to them, I was still the girl who played with paint instead of pursuing something they could boast about over cocktails at the country club. I took a slow sip from my chipped mug, watching the steam rise, wondering if they'd ever once considered asking instead of deciding. Mom, I said carefully, this is my workplace. It's how I support myself. Her sigh was theatrical. Camille, please. Your art barely pays for your utilities. Be honest. It's time you grew up. 36 is too old to live in a dream. I almost laughed. If only she knew that the large canvas drawing behind me was already sold, and the payment had cleared 3 days ago. More than enough to cover 2 months of my mortgage and a chunk of my Lisbon residency prep. I'd kept that part quiet, deliberately so. In 9 days, I'd be boarding a flight to Portugal for a 6-month creative residency that had taken me 3 years of applications and rejections and grinding commissions to finally land. The acceptance letter sat folded in a drawer beneath my best sable brushes, and I hadn't told a soul, not even my cousin Jordan, who I trusted more than most. It wasn't that I didn't want to share. It's that I knew they'd try to ruin it or demand that I delay it just a little for Jocelyn, as if her chaos was always more urgent than my stability. The call ended when I didn't give a definitive yes, but she ended it with, we'll be there this afternoon to help move your supplies. Jocelyn's bringing the boys. They've been through enough already. Let's not make this harder than it has to be. I stared at my phone long after the line went dead, her words still hanging in the air like the lingering scent of varnish. Thick, artificial, hard to scrub away. Within 10 minutes, a message from Jocelyn came through. Short and perfectly curated. Please, Cam. The kids need you. Don't be selfish. That word again. It always came back to that. I was selfish for not giving her my car when she wrecked hers during a late-night joyride. I was selfish for skipping Easter brunch to finish a mural contract that paid my property taxes. I was selfish for not giving up my room the year she and Reed had their first baby and moved in with our parents. I was selfish because I built something she couldn't understand and never tried to. And now she wanted to move into it. I walked to the window and watched the light crawl across the studio floor. I had spent years sanding these boards, painting every inch myself, hanging string lights in corners that always got too dark, and now they were going to tell me where to put a crib. I ran a hand through my hair, still tied back from hours of work, and thought about the email I got this morning from Isabel. The Lisbon Collective still wanted to move, and after I left, they were willing to lease the entire house for a year. It was perfect. I had every duck in a row, every piece planned. They were just stepping in to rearrange it all at the last second, like always. My hand found the drawer with the acceptance letter. I pulled it out and read it again, as if reminding myself this wasn't a fantasy. This was real. They were just loud enough to make me question it. Outside, a car door slammed. Early, of course. Jocelyn never showed up late unless she was avoiding responsibility. I watched from the kitchen window as she stepped out of a black Escalade, borrowed, I assumed, or gifted by a new friend she'd soon call toxic. Her oversized sunglasses masked whatever new tears she was rehearsing, and I watched as she surveyed the house with the critical eye of someone who assumed this was already hers. The house I had bought myself. 9 days. I could endure anything for 9 days. I would smile and pour tea and play the helpful sister while silently finishing my packing at night. I'd already secured off-site storage for my best pieces. My grandmother's china, the set my mother always borrowed and never returned, was freshly washed and ready for the show. If they wanted a performance, I would give them one so flawless they'd never know they were the ones being outmaneuvered. The kettle whistled just as Jocelyn rang the doorbell. I didn't rush. I walked slowly, tray in hand, pouring 4 cups and placing them just so. No one would notice there wasn't a fifth. No one ever noticed what I didn't give. Not until it was too late. Jocelyn didn't wait to be invited in, of course. She swept past me into the studio like she was arriving at a boutique hotel suite someone forgot to reserve under her name. Her heels clicked sharply against the old pine flooring I had stripped and sealed by hand the summer before last. The same summer she called me 3 times begging for money because Reed forgot to pay the electric bill. I stood in the doorway, watching as she opened my supply drawers without a word, flipping through my sketchbooks like she was browsing sale racks. "I'm thinking the crib goes here," she said brightly, gesturing toward the corner where I usually kept my larger easels. "So much light in the mornings, Max will sleep better with that." I didn't respond. There was no question mark in her tone, no space for conversation, only assumption. She'd already moved in, at least in her mind. I sat down on my work stool and leaned forward slightly, fingers laced together, elbows on knees, and asked the only question that mattered. "How long do you plan on staying?" Her head turned sharply, and for just a second, the mask slipped. Her eyes, still red from crying or maybe a tinted eyeshadow mistake, hardened. "God, Camille, my husband left me. I don't know. It's not like I'm living some dream here. I need time." I nodded as if considering that, even though I already knew time was not something I was offering. "Just asking so I can plan," I said calmly. "You know, studio deadlines, gallery shipments, inventory." She rolled her eyes and reached into a box labeled Portfolio B without asking. Our mother appeared from the hallway, clutching a mug like a weapon and smiling in that overly cheerful way she did whenever she wanted to mask manipulation as maternal concern. "Darling," she began, "Jocelyn's going to need a little time to stabilize. We're thinking 2 months to start, maybe 3, just until she gets on her feet." I raised an eyebrow. "That's a long time for the boys to adjust to a new space." "Oh, they'll be fine," she said quickly. "Children are resilient. And really, Camille, this space is perfect. The collective doesn't need it more than your family does." She said it casually, like I hadn't told anyone about the collective, like she was just fishing, but her eyes gave her away. She knew something. I smiled. "Not sure what you're talking about." "I just mean," she replied smoothly, "it's not like you've been renting it out. And Jocelyn needs somewhere safe." Jocelyn, as if on cue, dropped one of my canvas panels onto the hardwood. It slid dangerously close to the edge of the easel leg. I didn't flinch. I stood and walked into the kitchen, taking deep, slow breaths, letting the edge of the counter press into my palms until my heart slowed back down. My phone buzzed. A text from Isabel. "Lease paperwork finalized. Signed copies ready. Collective can begin move-in next Thursday." I typed back. "Perfect. Send me the scan." Returning to the studio, I saw they'd begun organizing piles. One labeled Keep included a plastic bin of Crayola markers and some craft paper Jocelyn must have thought I used for fun. My imported brushes, sketch archives, and reference books had been moved into a box labeled Storage, Non-Essential. I bent over, retrieved the brushes, and tucked them back into their drawer without a word. They didn't notice. They never did. Jocelyn was mid-sentence with a Pinterest photo open on her phone. We could do the wall in a sage green. Something calming. Or maybe a peach tone, like that mural you painted for that coffee shop with the plants. That was cute. Cute. She meant the 3-week commission that paid for my property taxes and 2 new gallery lights. Actually, I said, I'm preparing for an installation next month. I'll need the space through at least the first. She barely looked up. Just paint around the crib. It's not that deep. I bit back the urge to say something that would ruin everything prematurely. Instead, I excused myself again, this time heading into my bedroom and locking the door behind me. My phone buzzed with another message. This time from Wes. The preview line made my stomach tighten. You deserve to know what happened. It was never what she said. It had been 5 years since we'd last spoken. 5 years since Jocelyn had caught me kissing the gallery owner she said was trying to buy my work, an accusation that exploded just days before my first solo show in Montreal. The gallery pulled out, my plane ticket was canceled, and Wes disappeared. He never answered when I tried to explain. Eventually, I stopped trying. I stared at the screen, then typed back, "Coffee tomorrow. Tell me everything." When I returned to the studio, my father was standing in the doorway with his phone in hand, looking triumphant. "Just spoke with Steve," he said. "Your landlord's being a bit of a pain about the lease, but I'm sure we can smooth it over." I blinked. "You called Steve?" "Yes," he said, like it was the most natural thing in the world. "We figured it's time to make some arrangements. Once Jocelyn's moved in, we'll work out the rent." My fingers curled slightly. "Dad, I own this house." He laughed, assuming I was joking. When I didn't laugh with him, his smile faltered. "What do you mean?" "I bought it. 5 years ago. Cash down, mortgage mostly paid off by now. Steve hasn't been my landlord since I was 30. They all stared at me like I'd just spoken in another language. Jocelyn's mouth opened, then closed again. "You never said anything," she whispered. "Never asked," I replied. The silence stretched thin. Jocelyn recovered first. "Well, that's great news then," she said too brightly. "No lease to break. No landlord drama. This'll be even easier now." I looked at her like she was a ghost, something that haunted me but had long since died. "I'll need a few days to sort through my studio," I said evenly. "To pack what matters." Mom smiled like a cat who just cornered a mouse. "Of course, sweetheart. Take your time. The sooner you start moving things, the better it'll be for everyone." They left for the evening with plans to return early the next morning, loaded with paint samples, toy bins, and whatever broken heirloom excuse they'd found in storage. I stayed in the studio long after they'd gone, tracing my fingers across the grain of the wall where I'd carved my initials the day I closed on the place. My phone buzzed once more. A scan from Isabel. Lease signed. Collective scheduled. Everything in motion. 8 days left. Let the curtain rise. The next morning, I met Wes at a quiet cafe on the edge of town, the one tucked behind a bookstore where the Wi-Fi barely worked and nobody ever seemed to recognize me. He was already seated, same black leather jacket, same fidgeting hands, same way of scanning the room like someone used to being watched. When he looked up and saw me, something shifted behind his eyes. Maybe guilt, maybe regret, maybe just exhaustion from carrying too many lies for too long. "You look the same," he said quietly, like it was some kind of compliment I was supposed to thank him for. I didn't return the courtesy. I sat down, took the coffee he slid across the table, and waited. He took the hint. "I didn't cheat on you," he said without preamble. "Never did. Jocelyn lied. She made it all up." I blinked once. "I figured that out a while ago." He nodded, shame thick in his throat. "I didn't know how much damage she was causing until Reed reached out last month. Desperate, angry, and scared. That caught my attention." "Reed? You talked to Reed?" He nodded again, slower this time. "He told me Jocelyn was hiding money, stashing it in a secondary account under her name. She told him they were broke, kept demanding he pick up extra shifts, guilt-tripping him every time he wanted to take the boys out. He said she started making veiled threats about custody, about reputation, about telling people he hit her. That's when he left. Not because he's a coward, but because she pushed him out." I tried to process the flood of truths being laid bare in front of me. Truths I had only ever suspected but never confirmed. Wes reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small envelope, thick with folded papers. Bank records, text screenshots, receipts. She's been playing victim while living like a grifter. Your family still thinks she's helpless, but she's been planning this move for months. That house, the condo in Riverside Heights, it's hers. Paid for. Quietly, discreetly, so no one asks too many questions. I stared down at the documents, heart hammering like a fist against my ribs. My anonymous money transfers had bought her groceries, covered her kids' therapy appointments, kept her phone line active. And all this time, she had more than enough of her own. Wes leaned forward, dropping his voice. She's doing it again, Camille. She told your parents you're unstable, that you've been avoiding responsibility. She's trying to stay permanently. She wants your life now. I sat back, gripping the cup harder than necessary, the ceramic nearly cracking in my palm. Why are you telling me all this? I asked, though I already knew. Guilt. Clarity. And maybe because he still cared in a way that wasn't romantic anymore, but still rooted in something real. Because she did the same thing to me, he said. Because I let her, and I watched her ruin people's lives one lie at a time. And because I owe you. I left the cafe with the envelope tucked deep into my coat, fingers tingling with adrenaline. The drive home felt longer than usual, the silence inside my car dense and unrelenting. When I pulled into my driveway, I saw Jocelyn through the studio windows, standing with a tape measure in one hand and a wine glass in the other. She was laughing with my mother, who held a swatch of curtain fabric like she was decorating a model home. I didn't go inside right away. I sat in the car for a full 10 minutes, staring at the house I had bled for, the studio I had built with aching wrists and long nights, now being sized up like it was some stage prop in Jocelyn's redemption arc. When I finally walked through the front door, the smell of lavender cleaner hit me like a slap. They'd opened my storage closet, rearranged my labeled inventory, and set aside 2 more boxes labeled spare. I didn't even ask what they'd put inside. I just walked to my bedroom, shut the door, and locked it behind me. A message from Isabel was already waiting, lease copies printed, collective signed and ready. Just say when. I texted back, make it official. Sunday morning move-in. I'll be gone by then. My hands were shaking, not with fear but with the white-hot fury of someone done pretending everything's fine. I opened my laptop, uploaded the lease to my lawyer, and initiated the final paperwork. The next morning, I made coffee in silence while Jocelyn stood in the center of my studio on a call with someone named Lena, talking about crib assembly and paint timelines. My father walked in wearing his weekend polo, phone to his ear, and mouthed, "New contractor quote. Better deal." I didn't ask for details. I just nodded and sipped my coffee. Jocelyn smiled at me like we were sharing some sisterly inside joke, then said loudly into her phone, "Oh, she's being so great about this." Honestly, I'm surprised. I nearly laughed out loud. That afternoon, she handed me a list of items she wanted moved out by midweek, including my hanging sculpture installation and a rolling shelf of pigment jars. I smiled sweetly and said I'd get right on it, then placed the entire list into my recycling bin. Later that night, I went to the garage, gathered the materials I needed, and began packing what mattered: my portfolios, finished canvases, brushes, sketchbooks, and grandmother's china. The rest could rot, for all I cared. By Saturday, they were in full renovation mode. Jocelyn had hired a decorator, some friend from Pilates who showed up with a ring light and an Instagram account, to help design the perfect healing nursery. My mother followed her around like a proud campaign manager, listing my sister's recent hardships like talking points. I barely spoke all day, and no one noticed. But Wes messaged again, saw her new post. She's saying you begged her to stay, that you're scared to live alone. I replied with a screenshot of the sign lease and a photo of my packed suitcase. Sunday. She'll find out then. That night, I wrapped my final piece, an abstract portrait with layers of deep red and copper streaks titled Inheritance. It was scheduled to ship to Lisbon on Wednesday. I stood back and stared at it for a long time, noting how the negative space in the center seemed more powerful than the colors around it. Emptiness with intent. Silence made sacred. 7 days left. The game was nearly over. Sunday morning came wrapped in that brittle kind of silence you only notice when you're listening for something to break. I woke before the sun, not because I had somewhere to be yet, but because my body had memorized the weight of anticipation. I moved through my bedroom like a thief in my own home, checking my go bag one last time, rewrapping my grandmother's china, folding the acceptance letter again just to feel its reassuring crease. Outside, the driveway was still empty, but that wouldn't last long. At precisely 8:30, I heard the rumble of tires on gravel. I didn't need to look. I knew it would be my father's truck and my mother's matching sedan, engines humming like they had somewhere important to be, as if the studio renovation was some divine appointment. I poured myself coffee, letting the steam fog the window as I watched them get out, Jocelyn in her robe and joggers, already on a video call, Mom holding paint swatches, Dad with a clipboard like he was managing a construction site. None of them looked at the studio like it belonged to anyone but them. I opened the door just as my mother raised her fist to knock. She startled slightly, then smiled too wide. "Darling, we brought breakfast." Jocelyn thought bagels would be easy since the movers are arriving at 10. She breezed in before I could say a word, unloading a tray of baked goods onto my drafting table like it was a breakfast nook. Jocelyn trailed behind, eyes glued to her phone, narrating her digital plans to whoever was on the other end. "The wallpaper's already ordered. It's this really subtle birch print, very natural, not too busy for newborns." I didn't remind her that her kids were 5 and 8. I just smiled and stepped past her toward the studio. They'd done more than measure. Half the space had already been cleared. My canvas cart was now wedged beside the hallway radiator. My chair was missing. A box labeled "Fragile, Baby Stuff" sat in the center of the room like a planted flag. I turned slowly, took it all in, and let the image brand itself into my memory. My mother came up behind me, hands clasped like she was about to bestow a blessing. "We can repaint this whole wall today if you help clear it. Jocelyn loves that pale sage you used in your old guest room." My voice came out colder than I intended. "That was celadon. I used it for a gallery installation in Denver." She waved a hand, dismissive. "Well, close enough. It'll work." I moved toward the table, pretending to rearrange a stack of blank canvases. "Actually, there's something I need to show you." I reached into my drawer and pulled out the printed lease agreement, flipping to the second page before sliding it across the table. "This house," I began, "is under a lease agreement as of Friday. The studio is being rented by the collective starting today. They have a 12-month contract. They arrive at 9. The silence that followed was cinematic. Jocelyn stopped mid-sentence. My mother froze, mouth slightly open. My father appeared in the doorway, catching only the tail end. "What's this now?" he asked, stepping in. I turned to face them, calm but unflinching. "I leased the house. The paperwork is signed and filed. A collective of working women, painters, illustrators, textile artists, will be taking over the space. The rest of the house is included. I leave for Lisbon tonight." "You what?" Jocelyn blinked like I had slapped her. "You can't just lease out the house. Where are we supposed to go?" I met her eyes. "You'll have to figure that out. You still have the Riverside condo, right?" The blood drained from her face. "How do you know about that?" she whispered. My mother found her voice, shrill and rising. "You did this behind our backs? Without consulting anyone?" I raised my eyebrows. "You mean the same way you made renovation plans for my studio without asking me first?" Dad crossed his arms, voice sharp. "This is still family property." I turned slowly, retrieving the deed from my portfolio case and holding it out. "No, it isn't. It's mine. Bought and paid for with my work. Every mortgage check signed by me, not Steve. Every bill, every repair, every wall I painted, every floorboard I sealed. You all just assumed I rented because it made the fantasy easier to swallow." Jocelyn lunged forward, snatching the lease papers from the table. "You can't do this. I have children. They need somewhere safe." I didn't flinch. "They have a father who just filed for full custody. And you have a trust fund you haven't touched. I've seen the account statements. I also know you've been funneling payments from Reed into your private accounts while telling Mom and Dad you're broke." She stammered, lips forming excuses, but the front doorbell rang, cutting through her defense like a blade. I didn't move. I let my father open it. Isabel stood there, calm and collected, holding a folder in one hand and a box of keys in the other. Behind her stood 4 women, all dressed in work clothes. smiling politely as they carried easels, crates, and framed prints. "We're right on time," Isabel said, stepping inside. "Camille, is the studio cleared for move-in?" My mother turned to me, eyes wide. "You can't mean this." "Not really. This was supposed to be Jocelyn's chance to start over. We made plans." I looked at her, all steel and stillness. "Your plans don't require my permission anymore." Jocelyn dropped the lease, voice trembling. "You're going to throw your own sister out onto the street." "No," I said. "I'm going to Portugal. You have 48 hours to clear your things. After that, my attorney takes over. The collective has legal possession of the house. Any interference will be handled accordingly." My father started pacing, muttering about legal loopholes. My mother tried guilt. Jocelyn started crying. I watched it all like a movie I'd seen a dozen times, but finally knew how to end. I stepped outside for air while the collective moved in. Isabel followed, handing me a coffee. "They're furious," she said. "You okay?" I nodded slowly. "For the first time in years." She smiled and clinked her paper cup to mine. "Here's to burning bridges with intention." My flight left in 6 hours. My family was still inside, unraveling. I was already gone. The terminal was crowded with that kind of quiet chaos only airports know. People dragging luggage through their endings and beginnings, too focused to notice a woman sitting alone at gate 12, sipping overpriced coffee while watching her phone light up like a warning flare. My name buzzed across the screen over and over again. Mom, Dad, Jocelyn. Even a few unknown numbers I guessed were extended family now swept into the whirlwind. I didn't answer any of them. I just sat still, headphones in, volume off, letting their panic arrive in silence while I watched planes rise into the sky. Caitlin sent a video right before boarding. I almost didn't watch it, but I knew she wouldn't have sent it without reason. Her camera flipped on to show my front lawn, Jocelyn standing in front of the moving truck, arms spread wide like she could block the entire driveway with her self-importance. "This is my sister's house," she was shouting at the movers, who stood awkwardly beside the truck, waiting for instructions. Caitlin calmly turned the camera toward one of the collective members, who held up the signed lease and pointed to the timestamp. "It's ours for 12 months, legally binding," she said without raising her voice, then turned back to loading canvases onto carts. A moment later, my mother's voice cut through the audio, shrill and indignant. "Where is she? Where's Camille? She didn't tell us about a flight. She didn't say goodbye." Caitlin laughed softly behind the camera. "She did. You just didn't listen." My father appeared next, red-faced and waving his phone, demanding someone get legal on the line, as if lawyers would be impressed by parental entitlement. In the background, the collective continued unpacking with calm precision, transforming my old life into their fresh beginning. Watching it unfold, I felt something loosen in my chest. Not revenge, not triumph, just the clean simplicity of finally being done. When my boarding call echoed through the gate, I stood without hesitation. I didn't look back, didn't wave goodbye. I walked onto that plane like it was the only place I'd ever been meant to go. At 36, I finally knew how to leave something without waiting for permission to do so. The flight was smooth, quiet, a kind of serenity that I hadn't known I needed until it wrapped around me like a second skin. Somewhere between here and Lisbon, I stopped checking my phone. Stopped wondering if they'd show up at the airport, begging for another compromise. By the time we landed, I wasn't just somewhere new. I was someone new. 3 weeks passed before I even glanced at the media storm. I'd turned off all alerts, muted every number I didn't recognize, and buried myself in work. The studio in Lisbon was flooded with coastal light, the kind that turned shadows into brushstrokes. My new piece, a massive installation called Inheritance, had already drawn the attention of 2 major curators before it was even finished. But then Caitlin's name popped up again, along with a subject line I couldn't ignore. "You'll want to see this." I opened the link and watched as local news unraveled my family's story on the screen. Santa Verena woman claims sister abandoned her in time of crisis. Records show secret condo, hidden savings, and misuse of public sympathy. The video panned across Jocelyn's tearful face, now familiar to the public thanks to her viral posts. Then cut to commentators breaking down bank statements, social media inconsistencies, and real estate documents. The comments were ruthless. So she had a second home and still played victim? This sister sounds like the only adult in the room. Imagine stealing your sibling's house while pretending to be homeless. Hundreds of them, each one adding a new crack to Jocelyn's carefully polished persona. My mother's quote floated across the bottom of the screen. We were misled by our own daughter. We didn't know the full story. The irony made me laugh so hard I had to pause the video. An hour later, my phone lit up again. This time, an email from the gallery. My work had been selected for a multi-city European tour. Madrid, Amsterdam, Florence, Berlin, Prague, and finally, Paris. The advance alone would cover more than my parents' mortgage. I forwarded the message to Caitlin with a single line. I guess they were wrong about the little paintings. The collective sent a photo of the studio back home, sunlight pouring in, murals climbing the walls, laughter in the background as artists sketched, painted, created without apology. My grandmother's china rested on a floating shelf, untouched, but displayed exactly where it belonged. One of them added a handwritten note beneath the photo. Your space is sacred. Thank you for trusting us with it. Weeks turned into months. Jocelyn's meltdown became a cautionary tale in influencer circles. My father's firm, long thought untouchable, came under investigation after auditors traced money used to shield her secret accounts. He stepped down quietly, citing health reasons, but the damage was done. My mother stopped calling entirely. No apology, just silence, which, honestly, felt like the only honest gift she'd ever given me. Then came the opening night in Paris. The gallery overflowed with critics, collectors, strangers who'd only known my name from social media threads and viral exposés. I stood beneath inheritance, all copper veins and empty space, feeling the weight of every choice I'd made, every lie I refused to carry any longer. Someone asked what inspired the piece. I looked at the gold leaf outlining the hollow center, the negative space shaped exactly like my studio back home, and I answered without hesitation. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can create is the life that comes after letting go. After the applause, I walked out into the cold Paris night, phone in hand, unsure if I wanted to see what waited there. But the newest message wasn't from anyone I expected. It was from Wes. Just a single line. They're finally seeing who you are. I always did. Proud of you. I didn't reply. Didn't need to. I tucked the phone into my coat, looked up at the stars glittering over the city, and finally exhaled. My story wasn't a warning anymore. It was a map, and I was nowhere near done painting it.